I'm Maggie Ridgway.
And I'm Yasmin Hassan.
We're the
Great.
ones behind My Empower, which is like a women empowerment campaign. It's taking place through the Olathe South DECA club. And so next week, our campaign is focusing on women in sports. So after following you guys for, I think the past couple of years, we thought it'd be a great idea to like kind of flip the tables on you guys and interview you guys. First question is, why did you guys end up starting the Sunflower Show?
Troy can jump in wherever the holes are. So a little bit about our background. Both of us coached, and Troy still coaches girls basketball in the Kansas City area and outside the Kansas City area as well. And we both have daughters who are now 20 or sophomores in college, that age, that played basketball. And we were, we found ourselves, we always had lunch as our kids got into high school, and we talk about all the different players that we coached against and our kids have played against. And we started looking around at some of the rosters of some of the local colleges, even like the Northwest Missouri States and Emporia, and even the Division II level players. And there was like two, I think, Troy, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 2 or 3 players on any of the rosters that were from our area. And we're like, we know there's better basketball out there than this. And so ironically, it was about the same time that the Kansas City Star started really dropping their coverage of the you used to be able to find box scores and things like that in the paper, and they really went away from that. You saw very little on the sports on TV about girls basketball. And so we just, I'm a banker and he's a real estate guy. And so we just kind of said, let's figure out a way to get these kids some basically be advocates for them, if anything, and find ways to connect them to places if there's kids that want to play hoop.
That was the other thing, the old anonymity thing. We had daughters that were playing and we didn't know how well it would be received. So we never gave our names out early on because we were afraid our daughters might get the wrong end of the stick on the court or track or wherever they were. I mean, we would sit down and talk to each other and literally write on sheets of paper who we thought would finish, first through 13th in the conference, and do it like, just our own little top 13 polls for the conference.
Nerds.
And we were laughing about that. Started, kind of nerding out on who were the top players and who'd be first team all conference in our minds. And I mean, so here we are sitting at a McDonald's at like 2 PM and season's just getting ready to get started. And by about 6 o'clock that night, we joked about, I think that sitting there, we joked about we should do a podcast, which I didn't really know much about at the time. And Brian called me up about it. Yeah. And Brian called me up at 6:30 that night and said, hey, I think I got this thing figured out. Should we do this? And that's literally where it started. And that's pretty much what we do every week for our show. We sit down somewhere at an undisclosed location, and we literally just talk into Brian's phone for 45 minutes to an hour about what we saw the last week, about what we think about the teams and the players. And that's how we do it. We don't do a lot of extra takes or any of that. We just have fun with it.
Why did you guys focus on girls basketball over guys basketball when you could have a greater audience if you guys did do podcasts about guys basketball?
Even when I was in high school and Brian was in high school, I mean, there was always articles in the paper and they would show box scores and they'd show all this different information about teams. But even then, it leaned a lot more towards the boys than it did the girls. I've got 3 daughters, and the oldest being 20 all the way down to a 6th grader. And so for me, I was seeing this and recognizing it more, and maybe in a way I never had recognized it as a former male athlete and coach, and even some played at the college level and different things. I didn't recognize how little attention women and girls were getting in sports, and I know how hard they work. I've coached them at different levels all the way through, and I know how much they deserve. And I just felt like, for me personally, and what Brian and I talked about was it just wasn't fair that they're putting all this energy in and all this effort, the same amount that's being done for the boys teams, yet they get very little, if any, attention and less than maybe what the boys were doing. So it wasn't, in my first instinct, wasn't to equalize it. It was really just to energize those that were already doing it. And what we found out was the coaches were wanting more. We found out that the programs wanted to have some more things. They just didn't have the ability to get that information out or an avenue to do that. Brian's been strategic and instrumental on that type of stuff. I'm literally just a loud voice that talks every once in a while, and Brian really manages all this, puts it all together and makes it work. I think the girls have just really enjoyed being able to be a part of something, and that their efforts and their hard work pay off, and that they get a little recognition. And how cool is it that we've got 5th grade, 6th grade girls that are listening to this program now on the way to their club practices to hear about the teams at the high schools that they're going to end up playing at and they're end up going to, and they're finding out who the best players are, and then they go to those games and they watch them. And I think, if anything, in this long-winded answer, it can go as far as saying, I think it's anything as far as saying that, girls need role models in everything. It's not just in the things that it used to be, it's also in the things of today. And athletes and student athletes need those role models, and they don't even know who those people are if you never hear about them, if you never talk about them, and if you never give them that energy. And I hope that's something that we're able to accomplish a little bit.
So that's why our shows last an hour.
Hey.
I'm just kidding. I'll add just one piece in there, is that one of the reasons also that we stuck with girls is that Troy and I both knew a lot of the girls in the area pretty well, because we played and coached against them. So it was easier, because we literally decided to do this like December 1st, and the season was starting like a week later.
Yeah.
So being able to
That's true.
jump in, at least knowing some of the key players, was also a piece that made it easier than just, okay, let's sit out this season and start.
We had some boys after us. I mean, we had some boys coaches contact us as well that wanted us to do the same for them.
I get it.
And we didn't
I
do
get
it.
it all the time. I get it all the time, because I have a son who's a 17-year-old at Olathe Northwest, and he and his
Right.
friends are like, how come you don't do this for the boys teams? I'm like, really? Go watch the news.
I believe girls receive the respect they deserve.
Oh, boy. I mean, I think the short answer is no, just from a standpoint of the exposure, and you've seen it on at all levels, from NCAA to ratings and watching on different things. Has it gotten a lot better? I think it has, but a lot of it's just because of advocacy of groups and girls speaking up and males speaking up, and people who have platforms actually using them to say, hey, go watch this. There's some great athletes out there, and there's some great games being played, and there's some, whether you agree with them or not, but there's certain things, like I'll use women's soccer as an example. They stood up and said that we should be getting paid the exact same, and whether you agree with that or not, it's a different story, but they're standing up for themselves and being able to self-advocate. And I think that, if anything, it teaches a good lesson. Is it fair? I think that's kind of a tough one, because you can argue about some of the amount of income that male sports bring in, especially at the NBA or at the NCAA level, and some of that. And, it's hard to ignore that. I mean, I hate to be that way, because obviously we are always advocating for women's sports, but, there's legitimate arguments about that. But man, there's some great women athletes. And I think over the last several years, people have really started to pay attention. I think it's getting better, but I wouldn't say maybe they always get the respect they deserve or attention.
I think youth sports in Kansas City has grown so much that, especially in the soccer, volleyball, even in the youth basketball side, there's a lot of attention to girls' sports. I think there's a lot of avenues for them at this point in time. I think when they get to that high school and college level is when that separation of awareness begins. I think in the past, it's always like, well, they'll do basketball, but that, or yeah, they play a sport. But now I think they've developed the game enough in all those areas that girls have they've kind of done their time, right? Like they've spent that time in the club stuff or in multi-sports or whatever it is to kind of prove themselves. And so I think it needs to change more in that conversation at the high school and college level. You brought up great points, Brian, I think about, there is that level of it has to be financed somehow, right? There has to be availability for money to be able to pay for the programs. But I think that, at the college level, that's so true. But think about last year at the NCAA tournament, and they showed the men's workout facilities and they showed the women's workout facility, which basically was a bench press and about 5 dumbbells and a weighted ball. And in the men's, for all the teams that were coming to those locations had, 3,000 square foot full of gym and weight training equipment and usage for them to use. Now, I know that those women's programs are lifting 4 to 5 days a week, 6 days a week in the off season. I know that they're lifting 3 to 4 days a week during the season, and that it's just as important to them as it is to the men that they have those things available to them, yet no consideration of that until somebody, a player in college, stood up and said, man, this is crazy. So I like that conversation is out there. I think there are the financial pieces that still have to be understood because it is reality in that. But man, I think women's sports has grown so much at so many different levels that they absolutely deserve more credit than they're getting.
Our next question is, what factors about the girls' basketball community do you admire, and what do you think needs improvement?
Well, I think what we've found, I think as we've done the show, is that there is a passion and desire for girls basketball and sports. I mean, there's, whether it be parents, coaches, the girls themselves, you may not get quite the attendance numbers, but the amount of people that listen to our show is kind of ridiculous. It's kind of scary. A couple of dads putting on a show, and we don't do this for any money. We don't accept sponsors or anything like that. We just do it, and people listen. So I think that's one thing that's pretty cool about especially around here, the passion for women's basketball in the area is pretty cool.
What areas would maybe need improvement, or do you think could be
Yeah.
better?
And I think that's just that, maybe it's just the coordination, because we cover primarily the Sunflower League because it's 14 teams. It takes a lot of work. I mean, fortunately, I have a good employer. I have a good, I have good relations. I was obviously on the Olathe School Board for a while, and have those trust connections that we didn't have to go through and build some of that. And Troy knows a lot of people in the area, and so we didn't have to go through that. But the EKL, the Blue Valley schools and all those are banging down our door like, man, can you do this here? Can you do this here? And, we just, unless we quit our jobs and did this full time, which I would love to do, my wife would not like that very well. The pay would not even be there, of course. But man, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just getting some coordination of the efforts, or heck, let's just get it back on TV. I don't know, but I think those are probably the things there are still lacking. It's funny, there's certain people like Len Jennings, the Channel 9 news guy or sports guy. I don't know if you've ever watched news at all on regular TV, but he's like, he likes a lot. He'll message me behind the scenes on Twitter, want to know about the certain players before they go and interview certain things. We have a lot of, certain times of the year, I have a lot of coaches, college coaches, that'll message me. I know Troy has some that stop him out on the club scene, and they'll ask about players because they know and I think we're the people you're looking for, so just some a little bit more coordination, I think, of efforts that aren't about making money. I mean, there's a lot of recruiting sites out there and stuff, but really just let's talk about the kids you want on your team going forward, and tell their stories. It's fun to see.
One of the things we found out is how great the coaches are in the area. We built a lot of relationships with these men and women. Brian, especially with his direct interviews with team, preseason team stuff, and throughout the season, there is a lot of coaches that want so much for their kids. and in their entire programs, and not just for the kids that are getting recruited. They want it for all of them. And so I think that's been great that it's been so well received. There's very few coaches that have really kind of, maybe even stayed away from it for a little bit, wasn't as excited about it. They didn't know quite for sure if they knew us and they could trust what we were going to put out there, and they were trying to protect their kids probably. But I've been really happy with their enthusiasm of trying to make this more important and using this as an avenue to do so. If you talk about the game of basketball, is there something that can improve in that regard? 1A through 6A in Kansas specific, shot clock is a value to players in helping them to, make it more exciting, make it more watchable, make it more energy, make it more up and down the court, get more people to the games, get these girls more eyes on them and appreciation on them. A shot clock, I think, and putting a shot clock into the system, especially at the 6A level, and then work your way down to the 1A level when available costs are there, I think would be a big step towards improving the game of basketball in Kansas. It's happened in Nebraska and Iowa and these other areas where you've seen the level of basketball improve immensely. And I also think Kansas, I'm not probably Keisha's favorite friend, but I think more basketball games being available. If you go to Missouri school, ladies, I don't know if you know this or not, but if you're a basketball player in Missouri, before you graduate from high school, you will have played close to 40 more games of high school basketball than you would have if you played in Kansas. Now, there's various reasons why Kansas has put that in place, but it really, limits exposure to a lot of the girls in Kansas with the college coaches and the different things that come with that. And again, other states have made those adjustments, and I'd hope for the basketball purposes, and truly only basketball, that the shot clock and then more games would be available.
So you guys talked about a little bit about like deciding to focus on the Sunflower League and then expand it a little bit more. Is there any like particular reason why you guys decided to expand it outside the Sunflower League?
I'll speak for Brian real quick because he's going to talk about this more, but here's the deal. Brian has done, I think, about as much as he can do, like he said, with his job, to be able to go outside of that. We do have these touches and these communications with the EKL, with some of the 3 and 4A schools that are kind of on the western edge of the Kansas City metro area. We've reached out to the Wichita schools and the central, Topeka schools and out west. And Brian has done all that. I'm not taking one bit of credit for that, but it's a lot. I mean, all of a sudden, we were doing state tournament stuff last year, and I think Brian did like an extra 15 interviews outside of our Sunflower teams, and we had 4 teams at the state tournament. But it's interesting to see how many people, Brian, you might want to touch on this too. We actually did in the COVID year, when they only got through to the sophomore or through to the semifinals, and they didn't get to play the semifinals or finals of the championships. Brian put together on PlayStation, I think it was, he created all 4 of the Final 4 teams with their names, numbers, and everything, and the type of positions they were and the type of players they were. He got music for their fight songs for warm-ups and all these different things, starting lineups. And we literally did a play-by-play and color commentary of a video game playing itself out for a championship for the semifinals and finals, and crowned a virtual champion that year. There's a lot of time put into the stuff that we're doing. I'm not sure what more Brian, I guess I need to do some things probably is what Brian.
You're good. Hey, we just use your voice. You talk a lot, and you're the face of the show. So that's what we need.
Which is sad because I've got a face for radio, and that's not
whatever. I had time during COVID, and I love PlayStation. I'll be honest, it's a hidden favorite that keeps me grounded. And I created literally the players with their certain skill sets. I'd run practice games just to see how they turned out, to see if the stats made sense at the end of the game, all that, probably 50 different renditions of all the games. And I put it out there, and pretty soon a lot of the schools, because Liberal was still in there, the Liberal people reached out to me, direct messaged me, and they were like, hey, this is awesome. we're so pumped for our game coming up on PlayStation. And so I was on the radio out in Liberal. They had me on there. They have a talk radio show out there, a sports talk thing, and we talked about the show, and it got people noticing us out there. We've made connections. We did a roundtable with a group of EKL kids a couple of years ago, and those kids spread the word. And then the local schools, like Troy mentioned, DeSoto and Eudora and Baser and those schools from kind of the fringe areas all are like, hey, what about us? And I've coached a lot of kids in Baldwin and Spring Hill and Anderson County and some of those places, and Paola and Lewisburg, and they're all like, hey, what about us? And we all know, like Troy said, it's just a amount of time. Over time, there's been cool things that have come up. There's a kid I watched play from Salina Central who was amazing. I was like, who is this girl? I had her on the show this past summer. She's going to Navy, play basketball, and she's awesome kid. Just to get her word out around the Kansas City metro area, because I guarantee a lot of kids from Salina Central aren't making, the way into the radar of some.
And how many threes did she hit the other night?
She had 13 threes and set the state record on Tuesday night. So it's really cool. And I mean, it's just those types of things. You get kids and they don't forget this stuff, right? Like I had Emily Ryan, who's just tearing it up at Iowa State right now on the show. She's from a small town in western Kansas. Had her on. She was a really good player. I'm not saying she was flying under the radar, but had her on last year, talked about how her freshman year went. Now she was, I don't know, was she Big 12 player of the week last week,
Yep,
Troy, maybe?
last week. Yep, she was. We saw her play. Yeah.
Yeah, so we pick up little things like that, and they spread the word, and we just kind of go. And fortunately, we have such really good players here in the KC area. We can focus on the 14 Sunflower League and 8 EKL teams that are here and get enough exposure, and that we can do one-offs in different places that keep us going.
I love hearing about some of the impacts you guys have had. It's really cool.
It's very creative and we appreciate everything that you guys do.
Definitely.
I think one thing I'll mention that I think this kind of makes it worthwhile to Troy and I, probably our second year of doing this. There was a coach that messaged me and just had said, hey, I would have never found this kid if it wouldn't have been for your show. And that kid ended up getting a scholarship to play there. And they didn't stay there for very long. They were there for a couple of years, I believe. But when you hear that and you have a direct impact on just one kid, I think that's our ultimate goal, right? Is like give anybody a platform. I mean, the All-American kids are going to find their way just fine on the club circuit and all that. But if you can find that kid that really wants to play college basketball, but they don't have a platform, they might only be able to play at a really small school, but you can make that connection for them and help them get a degree at the same time. I think that's a huge thing, and it makes it so worthwhile for me, and I know it does Troy as well. So
yeah, and we're even adding a scholarship piece to it this year.
Perfect. I teed
we're
that up for you perfect, didn't I?
You did, didn't you? And I didn't mean to slap it on because of me by any means, but we're going to have a scholarship opportunity this year for one of the Sunflower League girls basketball players. That's a senior. A 1-year scholarship opportunity of $1,000 that we're going to give back to a student athlete. They don't have to be a college player. They don't have to go on to play college basketball. They can be a role player, whatever the case might be. Maybe they are the best player in the state. Doesn't matter. We're going to have an opportunity for them. And what's been interesting is since we've announced that, there's been a couple of different people or groups that are potentially willing to match some or all of that scholarship opportunity as well. So it may mean that we're able to give out amounts of cash to multiple people, and to further their education and to kind of give them some credit for the efforts and again just what they're doing as student athletes.
Our last question was your guys' favorite positive impacts, but I think those hit it perfectly.
Yeah, I think probably those are two of them, but I will mention we hear from the most from parents And ultimately from coaches are two things. One, the connectivity the kids make with different players from different teams. And just like, oh, I know that person. Oh, you do? How? Well, we're connected on Instagram or whatever through the Sunflower Smack show. I hear
Yep.
that from people. And two, their ability to now do interviews, because before they weren't doing interviews. And now they're prepared to talk, even though they're interviewing with somebody like me, who's a banker, and and Troy, who, I mean, we're neither of us are media people, right? We're just talking, and for them to be able to communicate and do an interview, ultimately helps them in the long run. So I think those are a couple that we hear from the most from parents and coaches, I think.
I was just going to say the other thing is that little piece, and we kind of mentioned at the beginning. I was a high school and college athlete as well. I love to see my name or hear it on TV or whatever and stuff, right? And I know there's a lot of girls that Brian stays in touch with that we've been doing this now with for 3 or 4 years. And it's still important to them that they've got a T-shirt signed by all the other kids for Player of the Week or Player of the Week honors that they got, and or that they got a free T-shirt at some point in time from Brian because they got interviewed, early in the year. Those things kind of stick with them, and then they listen. They listen about their own. There's nothing wrong with. It's not an ego thing. It's just everybody loves to hear their name, and everybody loves to hear about their efforts and that they've done good things.
You guys are on Instagram, I know. Are you on Twitter as well?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram and Twitter. We also have like our own website, and this year we started a TikTok. We just do like last year we focused on gender bias, and then this year we wanted to make a more positive impact, so we stuck with women empowerment.
Our first year, we promoted the girls' basketball game, their pink night. And so we partnered with Prom Nutrition to make like a drink, and we tried to increase the attendance of that game.
What's funny too, just a quick story on that, on the basketball tournament that we did virtually that, Brian put together and stuff on PlayStation. What's funny is we actually had parents that were angry about the outcome because they felt like we didn't give their daughter as much ability as what they thought they should have. And so they think the outcome would have been different because Brian didn't build the character well enough. It's amazing. It doesn't matter if it's real or fake. You're still going to get some parent commentary on the deal.
I guess that should have prepared me well for my school board days, right?
Yes, it should have.
Yeah,
That should have been all the prep you needed, buddy. That's right.
Yeah, no, I know everyone at Oasis House absolutely loves you guys, appreciates everything you do. I listen to your guys' show and I absolutely love it.
I appreciate you.
Well, we
Yeah.
appreciate that. We appreciate that. If you ever
That's
have
really
like
nice.
ideas, let us know. I mean, that's one of the things that we try to do is make sure we're like our listeners, the people that want to listen, like what do you want to hear? Like what? Because sometimes it gets old. What do you want to hear? Want to hear about?
Are you saying my
Not it.
long drawn out stories and explanations are boring to
No,
people?
I'm talking
Brian? Is
about
that
all
what
the
you just
crap
said?
that I do. I'm talking about all the crap that I do.
Well, then I agree
like,
with that. Yeah, I
some
agree
of the
with that.
stuff some of the stuff might be nuisance, and some of the stuff is like, wow, that was really good stuff.
Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, thank you
Anything else?
guys.
Holler if we can help at any point along the way. We're here to help. And again,
Absolutely.
you're advocating, we're doing the same thing. But it was just great to hear you, Troy. Good to meet you both.
You as well. Thank you.
All right.
Have a
Take
great
care,
day.
guys.
See you, Troy.
Bye-bye.
Take care.